Concerns.
Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
One moment.
Here is today's host.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining our show today, Legal Issues of the Day with Nathaniel Lee. Today, we also joined with our superstar panel, Attorney Vanita Banks, Masters in Tax, Cyber Security expert, just a brilliant lawyer, and Attorney Milton Grimes, who famously represented Rodney King and been one of the top trial lawyers in America for decades from LA and Chicago. So we get different views in different parts of the country. But today, all eyes on the world is where? Georgia. I got Georgia. I woke up with Georgia on my mind, and I was looking at some of these speeches that a Senate candidate in Georgia named Herschel Walker was saying. The speeches he gave are so ridiculously stupid until I was thinking to myself, this person actually running for one of the most powerful positions in the country and absolutely is totally unfit to even run for this office. It's just astonishing to me that the polls could be so close. But in that, I don't know. Attorney Banks, have you been watching any of those speeches down in Georgia?
I have not been watching those speeches. I've been more focused on those speeches that have been made by our President Barack Obama and others that have been campaigning on behalf of Senator Warnock. And as you know, this weekend is the last and final stretch toward the runoff election on Tuesday, December 6th. And what we know at this point is that a record number of voters have already cast their votes early, and that as of today, 1,852,000 citizens have cast an early vote. And so we know from the November election that Senator Warnock, he carried the early vote, and opponent Walker carried the election day vote. But as you say, all eyes are on Georgia, and what can our listeners do to support this campaign? One, you can send a contribution. You can sign up at votingrightsalliance.org. This weekend, you can volunteer to text, make phone calls. You have time to drive to Georgia to assist in getting the vote out on election day. We know that this election is pivotal. It is critical. Our democracy is still at stake. Senator Warnock has a proven track record. His vote in the Senate can be the difference between codifying Roe versus Wade and protecting our voting rights.
Well, that's amazing. Attorney Grimes, you don't have those issues out in California, but Georgia's on my mind today.
Okay, that's okay. Can you hear me, Nate?
Loud and clear.
Okay, I'm just tuning. I missed what Ms. Banks said. Go ahead, please.
Well, she gave an overview of what's going on in Georgia, and but we have a lot of listening audience down in Georgia, and I hope that all the folks down in Georgia are out there knocking on doors, calling your friends, and make sure that everybody get out and vote. The key to that election, it seems like to me, is that Senator Warner has to get over 2 million votes. It looked like, based on the current turn, it's going to take about 2.1 million votes to win that election. I looked at the prior election. There was a little bit over 4 million votes cast in the Senate race. And my concern is that that's a lot of votes. The population is, 11 million in Georgia? And so that tells me that you're going to have a really high turnout. But in Georgia, they spent more money on that election than any time in Georgia history on any election. So hopefully it works, because democracy is at stake in these elections. We have the unique opportunity to appoint more judges by having the 51 senators. The process is slowed because what has happened is that we cannot get the civil rights legislation passed because we can get 2 of our senators to go along with critical legislation. And then I saw those folks talk about what the Biden administration didn't do. They say he's responsible for inflation and high gas prices. Well, we find out that the high gas prices had all to do with the Saudis was trying to help the Republicans. So they artificially cut back production. They made billions of dollars. I think the Biden administration should retaliate against them by charging them more money for all those weapons. All those billions they made in profits, I was suggesting them they charge them money on the weapons instead of charging 40 billion, charging 120 billion. And so that's my thought process. That's how you did in the gas issue. If they're going to charge us more for the price of gas, let's charge them more for what we supply them. We've helped them with their defense. And so I was concerned, though, when these foreign countries seem somehow hell-bent on interfering with our election by trying to tilt the scales in favor of one party versus another party. It's untenable, I think. I think that we need to all be against that. But the other thing in terms of Georgia, I don't know whether you paid attention, Attorney Brian, but Herschel Walker has said, in the history of politics, probably said some of the dumbest things that have ever been said by any candidate. I don't know if you paid any attention to any of those speeches that he's given, but they get dumber and dumber.
Well, you went to school with him as a representative of your school.
Well, let's talk about that. For the record, Herschel Walker made representation that he was an honor roll student and that he had graduated top of his class. The truth of the matter, I did meet Herschel Walker. We used to play basketball in Stegman, but he was not a basketball player. He was one of the greatest athletes to play football ever, but he was a terrible basketball player. We had Dominique Wilkins and those guys. Back then, as a new student, he was not a smart guy then. Great athlete, but not very bright. But he was not in a regular academic program. Back then, at the University of Georgia, they had some outstanding programs, the law school, their veterinary medicine, the MBA, some of the tops in the country. When I was there, our law school ranked the 19th best law school in the country. But they did not take regular classes. When they came to the University of Georgia, Attorney Grimes, they took remedial classes that did not count for college credits. So Georgia had this system in place where these athletes would take these courses their first year to get all A's. And I think that we were making a joke about it back then. We're saying, you made an A in those class by simply spelling your name. Herschel, last name Walker, that's an A. There was no, and so they got sued because these athletes could not graduate. So their first year they were in college, they made these A's. These was non-college courses, right? And so they were trying to make them fit to be able to compete in the regular classes. So the net result is that for decades, only one athlete had graduated from the University of Georgia to play football. Wow. Now, they were sued by Professor Jan Kemp, and that's led to massive change with the NCAA. NCAA has the mandatory graduation, things like that, but it emanated in part from the University of Georgia. And so a guy like Herschel Walker never had the academic ability to really matriculate from the university because he didn't just have the academic skills. And now, somehow, he's running for Senate. And he said something the other day that was just mind-boggling. He said that he's responsible in part for Donald Trump kids' intelligence. I was watching this speech is so dumb. He said over summer, he would keep Donald Trump kids at his house down in Texas for Donald Trump. And he would teach them things, and therefore he'd take credit for them being smart. I
But I haven't had the opportunity to read or listen to Herschel's speech, and I'm thankful I have it now.
Hey, Turner Banks, I was watching one of the commercials, and this guy in the commercial, they said, "Is he real?" And this guy said, "Man, I've lost about 10 minutes of my life there. I never get back watching this guy."
But
I think that captures Milton's sentiments as well.
but you know, Nate, that method or system, it was all over the country. I've been working with young athletes in high school and trying to get them involved in college programs ever since I was a lawyer, ever since I became a lawyer. So 50 years was shameful. The academic abilities of some of the high school stars in football and basketball. It was worse, say 30, 40 years ago. But even today, they don't seem to be on top of these young men or women academic program the way they should be.
Yes. Well, what they do, since that lawsuit, the major colleges have outstanding academic program for the athletes. I've witnessed it firsthand. I remember going to I went to about 14 colleges when my son was being recruited for track, and I looked at all their academic programs, and they were really impressive. The academic programs will have tutoring opportunity for the athletes, because many of the athletes, when they're competing, it's like a full-time job. A lot of people don't realize that. Collegiate football, you're up at 6 a.m. and you're looking at film between 7 and 9 at night. And so it's more than a 40 hours a week job. It's more like a 60 hours a week job. And, and there are year-round programs. You don't play sports in August. It's year-round. After the season's over with, you go into the weight training program, and you're doing that weight and conditioner every day of the week. And you get off on weekends, but by and large, it's a full-time job year-round. And so, but having said that, none of that helped Herschel Walker, and so that was the issue there, that we have a person who, because of celebrity status, has a good chance to be a U.S. senator, and it's sad, unless the people continue to vote like they never voted before down in Georgia.
Well, we have seen that the early voting numbers are the highest ever recorded in the state. So I think that is a good news, although there has been a compressed voting period as a result of a lawsuit filed last week. Early voting began last Saturday in some of the counties, specifically in Atlanta. And however, we are seeing wait lines of up to 2 hours to vote. And today is the last day of early voting in Georgia. We're seeing very heavy turnout in Black counties and traditional Democratic strongholds. And so it is anticipated that there will be a strong turnout on Tuesday.
Well, I hope that the turnout involved the Democrats, because in the Georgia, this vote system they utilized was meant to disenfranchise African American. When they introduced this, the whole idea was that in the general election this year, we had a left-wing libertarian that garnered 2% of the vote. And he wanted to legalize marijuana and all these things. And so it's almost like they put these people up to run, and in close election, you have to have runoff, because there's 2%. Warner got 49.4, but he'd have gotten 51% if the left-wing guy who wanted marijuana would not have been raised. But they introduced these runoff system, and the idea was that in the general election, by holding the candidates under 50%, that the whites could unite and defeat them in the runoff election because they could get them together. And so the idea of this runoff was based on systemic racism to start with. And so now we're seeing the African American, particularly in Georgia, saying that, wait a second, we'll stand in line for 2 to 3 hours just to vote. They passed these draconian laws to restrict the voting time. Now think about this. They have 5 days to do early voting, and you stand in line for 1 to 2 hours to vote. That's just, to me, is not democracy. What's it all about? They could have had the early voting for 10 days, and the lines would not be 2 hours long, maybe 30 minutes. But they didn't want that. The idea was to compress the voter turnout, and that's sad. Then we have one caller. Caller, you have a question or comment for us today?
Good afternoon, Nate. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Good afternoon, the other attorneys. It was just, I tried to post something, but it didn't work. But basically what I was trying to post was a story in the New York Times about 3 days ago. And it talked about Black turnout in the midterms was one of the low points for Democrats. And it goes in to an analysis of the Black turnout. And it said this falls in 3 southern states, Georgia, Louisiana, and North Carolina. It also talks about Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Detroit, where the turnout was lower too. Almost, they're talking about 25% lower than white voters. And they say one of the good things about Georgia's Warnock apparently appears to be doing well among non-Black voters. But the point is, of the article is that Black turnout is lower, almost by a quarter than white voters. And we got to turn that around before 2024. And it's a really good article. It's in the New York Times.
Yeah, but what the question though is that how do we do that, Pierre? Okay, we know that there's a problem. So what's your solution to fix it? How do we get more African American involved in the voting process?
Well, if we could get, maybe we could get Attorney Grimes out there to talk to the entertainment community out there in California. That might help. But I don't know. Young Black folks, we got to find a way to get them engaged. And I don't think the entertainment community, the entertainment community back in the 60s and the 70s, I don't think the entertainment community is doing its job. We talk about Black Power, Black Fist, Black Lives Matter, but we're just not that sector of the Black population is just not getting it done, in my opinion. They're not. They're just not showing up.
Okay.
And
well,
we got to get more involved and not.
Okay.
I agree with Pierre. We have to convince Black voters that their votes matter. And there are lots of elections that have been won by, small percentages. And I'm speaking more at this point. And of course, we can look at some of the swing states in the 2020 elections where elections were won in some of those states by just thousands of votes. But so we have to convince Black voters that their votes actually matter, because we know that when we vote, we win these elections. And we have to tie the accomplishments of this administration, for example, to how how they benefit Black communities and communities of color.
Well, thank you very much, because we have the lowest African-American unemployment rate we've had since I can recall. We had a government that saved millions of lives by properly allocating funds to get rid of COVID. We have historic things. People were paid during the COVID to stay off. We got all these different things that they did. And then Republicans say, well, look at inflation, look at gas prices. So their whole thing is that gas prices and inflation. They ignored the fact that we had the highest number. This administration created more jobs in the first 2 years than the combined total of any of the last 10 presidents, in a 2-year time period. You take any two, they created 10 million, whereas the Trump did 2 million, Biden did 10 million. So it's incredible. Let's take one more caller. Caller, you have a question or comment for us?
Hello, Brother Nate.
How you doing today, sir?
All right, good, Brother. I'm going to tap here, and hello to the esteemed guest as usual. A couple legal things I'd like to throw out there. I know you were covering voting, but I think these are 3 important things. And Attorney Banks, I definitely want you to elaborate on one. This last one, I think it's groundbreaking, and I don't know if any other states are doing it. In Illinois?
Yes.
Yes, okay, when you get a chance, thank you. But the VA lawsuit against the 2 black dad and black son, who Vietnam veterans have just filed their lawsuit against the VA.
Hello,
on
Nate,
behalf,
can you hear?
Yes.
Can you hear me, Nate? On behalf
Yeah, loud
of
and clear.
Hello.
Yes.
We can hear you loud and clear, Milton.
Okay, good. On behalf of Yale Law School, I think that's groundbreaking. I'm proud of Yale again and other schools that are helping, or other individuals. I want to say, I know Jay-Z never gets any credit, but Rock Nation has definitely done a great job getting blacks either sentences, legal representation for low-level offenses, or getting their cases thrown out. So we want to throw that out there. But if you get a chance, look up this VA lawsuit from the black veterans claiming just disparaging discrepancies within the VA against black people for benefits. Matter of fact, I'm a veteran, and I'm on my way to make a claim probably at the beginning of the year or so. I'm going to be interested in that. Number 2, Nate, your field here, our field, Dr. Rakita. Now, the judge admitted that Rakita violated the law, but he's still going to release those medical records. I think that's a travesty. That puts the doctor in jeopardy. We know how we got crazies out here already. I just didn't think that. How do you admit that Rakita violated the law, but that you still award the medical records? That doesn't make any sense to me. It's
Well,
like they
wait a
just
second.
pick and choose.
I agree with you.
Go ahead.
I think that was ill-conceived for a judge. I know the judge. I think that was a poor decision, because medical records are confidential and private. So we have a 10-year-old child, and I think that that's unfathomable that any judge even consider releasing those private medical records. The patient, our federal law requires consent. And so if I was a lawyer, I'd take it to federal court and immediately or so, because it's a violation of federal law. I don't understand that.
I hope so. I hope they get in there. That you admit Rakita violated the law, yet you're going to reward him. That's contrary to what we teach children and stuff like that. I don't understand that. And then, of course, Attorney Banks, you can elaborate on Illinois and these. I read about. I was up there over the last couple of days. Had to go to a best friend of mine's funeral, so I was listening to WBBM a lot, AM 780. That's the local channel in the Chicago area, people for news. And they had made some changes, I said, but they said it didn't take away from the spirit of what they were trying to do. And I'll let you explain that. And thanks for taking my call.
Absolutely. And thank you, caller, for that lead in. The Safety Act is the groundbreaking, massive Illinois legislation that was actually passed last year. It was authored by the Illinois Black Legislative Caucus. And we've heard a lot about one feature of the law, which I believe we're the first state in the US that would eliminate cash bond. However, with exceptions for certain offenses, including murder, sex crimes, domestic violation. Although cash bond has been eliminated, this does not mean that people will not be retained. Those that have been charged with forcible felonies and other offenses will not be released if it's determined as well that a detainee may be a threat to public safety, a flight risk, and repeated offenders. So you're hearing a lot about, cash bonds eliminated, and that's going to result in, increase in crime on the streets of our cities here in Illinois. But that element of the law will not result, and it will not permit all detainees to be released. So that's an important takeaway from this legislation. But the cash bond system had been shown to create inequities in the criminal justice system. Many times people were incarcerated for many, many years simply because they couldn't make a bond. And so the amount of money that someone had determined whether or not they could be released, and not based on necessarily whether they presented a flight risk or whether they were likely to flee prosecution. So let's be clear that there is no such thing in Illinois as a non-detainer offense.
Wow, thanks a million for that overview. I wasn't familiar with that. There was something that happened this week, Attorney Banks and Attorney Grimes, and it reminded me of something. Attorney Grimes won a death penalty case in Illinois where a assailant killed a police officer, and so he was given the death penalty, and then they hired him, and it's probably one of the most remarkable verdicts in the history of America when the person was acquitted in the retrial by Attorney Grimes. They had all kinds of evidence. I remember you telling me the stories. They had people, the cops were in the courtroom every day to kind of intimidate the jury, and they still won. The reason I say that is that there was a trial this week in DC about against the insurrectionists, and they had video evidence, emails, phone recorded, and they had one of their co-conspirators that ratted them out. And they tried the case, and somehow they thought they would be acquitted. I say, even Attorney Grimes wouldn't be able to get these guys off. I mean, did anybody follow that case about the insurrectionist verdict in DC this week?
No, I did not follow that case, Nathaniel, but I'm sure there must be some evidentiary issues that we don't know about out here in the public that goes on in the courtroom when I hear about how could this happen and how could that happen in a particular trial. So I'm a little hesitant to comment on whether or not something was justified or not justified if I don't know all of the evidence that the jury saw. A lot of evidence you know about or hear about in cases never get to the jury, so they don't have it to consider in guilt or innocence of a person. So that's what I'd have to say.
Attorney Banks, you get a chance to watch any of that, review that trial?
I was able to, of course, I knew that the charges had been filed by the Justice Department. And of course, this week, Attorney General Merrick Garland held a press conference where he spoke about the jury verdict this week against two members of the Oath Keepers, the founder, Stuart Rhodes, and Kelly Meggs. They were both convicted by a jury or found to have committed seditious conspiracy for their role in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. And we know that the Oath Keepers are a right-wing militia group. And we also know that the biggest threats, domestic threats from groups like this are the biggest threats to our national security. So they were both found guilty of seditious conspiracy, which is defined as two or more people conspiring to overthrow or destroy by force the federal government, or to level war on the United States, or to oppose the federal government's authority by force. There were three other defendants. They were not found guilty on seditious conspiracy charges, but they were convicted of other multiple felonies. The prison sentence for seditious conspiracy is up to 20 years. This was a big test for the Justice Department's ability to hold those people accountable for attempting to overthrow the United States government by attempting to prevent, one, the peaceful transfer of power, and two, the Congress from confirming the electoral vote. And so this was a major victory for the Department of Justice, and it sends a clear signal to other groups that the DOJ intends to hold anybody accountable that attacks our democracy.
Well, what I was interested in this case from an evidentiary standpoint, Attorney Graham talked about it, but they had posted, somebody had posted most of the evidence on the internet. And so they were naive enough to record their activities. Mm-hmm. So the criminal activity was captured on video, email, voice recording. And so the actual case was the defendant presented evidence against themselves. So I was thinking to myself, under what circumstances would a person continue to record criminal activity? And it seemed to me that these folks actually believed in their heart, in their mind, and their soul that what they're doing was legal right and justified. And that disturbed me because you have, they say 30% of Americans believe that Donald Trump won the election. So, you know, it scares me as a nation that somehow these folks who are trying to overthrow the federal government record what they're doing and think that it's somehow legal.
Their feelings were deeply held. And to your point, Attorney Lee, it was amazing that there were recorded texts, there were Facebook messages all over social media that outlined their plans to travel and bring weapons to the Capitol. And understand that Stuart Rhodes, the founder of the Oath Keepers, who was convicted, he never entered the Capitol, but he communicated with others as they stormed the Capitol. So there was evidence that this was a coordinated, planned attack to stop the congressional certification of the Electoral College. So this is a precedent-setting verdict. There are two other trials that are scheduled for still yet this year. And very rarely do you see a conviction on a seditious conspiracy charge. The last time was 30 years ago. These cases are very, very difficult to prove.
Wow, that's incredible.
Hello.
But yes, yeah, I can hear you, Mo. But the next issue, though, Attorney Banks and Grime, is the Shaquille Robinson murder in Mexico.
I'm missing a lot of. I can't hear.
Okay, can you hear me now? Oh, your internet is phasing out, Attorney Grimes. Attorney Banks.
Maybe he can call back in, or
yeah, no, his internet connection is fading out. Your internet, you're losing part of your internet. But Shaquille Robinson apparently went down to Mexico with some of her friends, and she was murdered.
Hello, Nate. I'm missing everything. I'm gonna call back.
yeah, sometimes it's helpful to call back in.
Okay. In event. Okay. So the. Wait for a second. Well, what do you think about that, Attorney Banks?
The murder or the killing of Shanquilla Robinson in Mexico is just truly a devastating tragedy. A young college student goes to Mexico on vacation back in October, and a day later, she is brutally beaten and dies in Mexico. And it's just a horrible, horrible situation. There was a video that shows her being thrown to the ground and beaten. My question regarding the video, obviously someone in the hotel room, one of the friends, there were 6 so-called friends that went on this trip to Mexico. So someone in the room made this video or recorded this scene of her being brutally beaten. And then, of course, the autopsy report showed that she sustained severe neck and spinal injuries, although the so-called friends stated that she may have been poisoned by alcohol. And so I'm really focused on this video. One, who took the video and who sent the video to the authorities? Who made that video public is my question. And the name of that individual has not been released. Maybe that person is operating in the context of a whistleblower. We also know that these so-called friends lied to the parents, and that the Mexican officials have issued an arrest warrant for one of the individuals that were presumably the individual that's seen in the video attacking Miss Robinson. And the question becomes whether or not she can be extradited to Mexico to account for this charge that we don't hear a lot about in the United States, the charge of femicide, which is the intentional killing or murder of a female because of her gender. There are 16 countries that have this law, but the United States is not one of them. Femicide is a term that is not defined in US legislation to date. Let me stop there.
Well, Attorney Grimes, Attorney Banks, you could actually Google this, and the video is very graphic. Shakur Robinson is naked and apparently in a hotel room, and she's brutally attacked and beaten. And you know what bothered me about this whole episode? What bothered me is whoever took the video, I felt should have intervened and stopped this brutal beating. It's almost like the father said that it was like a setup, that his daughter is brutally beaten and killed, and they're videotaping it, and like it's a badge of honor. To me, it's a badge of cowardice to kill and brutally beat this young lady to death on vacation in Mexico. It's such a it's the lowest of low in American tragedy. We go to a foreign country and we murder a friend. Now, the Mexican justice system apparently is going to try to indict and probably end up, because they captured on video, I suspect that she's going to be convicted and probably going to spend the rest of her life in a Mexican jail, the person who perpetrated this brutal beating and ultimate death. Very sad thing to watch. The video is very graphic, and you see this person just totally beating her, and the person being beat doesn't even respond. She just beat her brutally, and not once did the person looked like in the video offer any defense. It's almost like the Shakur Robinson maybe was, I don't know whether she was drugged or maybe had some drink. I'm not sure, but she offered no resistance in the video to the beating. I don't know whether or not you see it, but you can Google it, and it's just a terrible thing to watch for somebody to be beaten so brutally. I mean, she beats her, does everything. I mean, just sad.
So I'm sorry, guys, I'm just coming back in on this discussion, but are we faced with an issue, Ms. Banks, that the United States, because they don't have this femicide law, are they not cooperating with the Mexican government with the expedition of the suspect?
The not on that grounds at this juncture, at least not, I've not heard that. The extradition process, from my understanding, is in process.
Okay.
The Mexican officials are in contact with U.S. officials, and they have issued a warrant for the arrest of one of the individuals, presumably the individual that is shown in the video as brutally attacking Miss Robinson.
Okay.
And if convicted, as Attorney Lee said, the individual could serve up to 60 years in prison.
Well, I don't understand this crime, Attorney Grimes. It says investigation was initiated for femicide, a hate crime where women are killed due to their gender.
There is femicide occurring around the world. It's a global problem. It was a devastating problem in Mexico, where women are the subject of murder and sex crimes and domestic violence. Despite this femicide, which is akin to homicide, but this is specifically created to address women that are brutally treated in this way. And there's two concepts. There's intimate femicide and non-intimate femicide. And it is defined as the intentional killing of a woman because of her gender. Sorrowfully, about 95% of femicide cases in Mexico, they go unpunished, even today, despite of this law.
Right. Yeah, I've looked into that issue somewhat, And there are laws around the world, Nate, that the United States does not have, like fanticide. I discovered when a client of mine killed her newborn child, that in some countries, if you kill your newborn child within the first year, you are only prosecuted for manslaughter, not murder, because they associate it with having a disorder associated with childbirth. So it's not strange to hear about this fanticide law. I'm surprised there's not a limitation on the punishment under that law, with the regard for some of the third world countries have for women, or the lack of regard they have for women. But I had not heard of this.
What about this, Counselor? Doesn't American law allow the prosecution of Americans who committed crimes against other Americans, even in foreign territory? Wouldn't that be something the FBI investigated, and that person could be subject to some type of federal crime?
The FBI is investigating this case, Attorney Lee, and we will see whether it determines to proceed with bringing some charges against at least the perpetrator of the beating, and maybe others that were involved with just standing there and doing nothing and allowing this brutal killing to take place.
Well, that's the interesting legal concept. Attorney Grimes, I know you and we litigated a bunch of these police misconduct. There's a duty for a police officer, for example, to intervene to prevent another police officer from committing a crime. But is there a duty for a private citizen to intervene to prevent another person from committing a crime? I don't think there is.
I don't think there is.
I agree. When we talk about, the Good Samaritan,
Right.
whether or not there is a duty to intervene or to help someone who may be injured on the side of the road. My understanding of U.S. law that there is no such duty.
No, there's no duty, but once you do intervene, then you have a responsibility and duty to do so in a caring or careful or helpful manner. You can't worsen the situation.
You must exercise due care.
Right.
In your providing assistance.
Right.
Now, what was fascinating in the Ahmaud Arbery case, the person who videotaped the brutal murder was also convicted. And in that case, though, apparently, I didn't watch all the trials. I watched bits and pieces of it. He may have had some involvement in
running them down. Yeah.
Yeah, he did something. I can't remember exactly what he did because there were so many moving parts on the case, and it was such a lengthy trial, and I was trying to watch bits and pieces of it. I watched the verdict part, but not the whole trial. But the point is that in this case in Mexico, where the person videotaped this brutal beating, I was thinking to myself, there ought to be some punishment on the person who videotaped this. And why were they videotaping it in the first place? Were they doing this as a trophy? Why did they do that? I was just thinking to myself, and then it got posted online. I like to follow up on the story to find out some of the details, because it just seemed like to me that this whole thing just really is a terrible ordeal. The videotape a friend being brutally murdered like that in front of your eyes, and you do nothing to intervene. It's just shameful.
Pierre has raised some interesting questions in the chat box, and this week I decided to start looking into more detail the laws relative to extradition. And he's asked questions: do U.S. prosecutors have jurisdiction? Well, the FBI is investigating that right now. And what about a cruise ship if the ship is flagged, in another country? We do know that Mexico and the United States, they do have an extradition treaty to extradite Mexican nationals back to Mexico and U.S. nationals back to the United States. There's a bilateral extradition treaty. the question will become, and while there's cross-border cooperation in these law enforcement matters, for example, Mexico will not extradite a felon unless the government has a guarantee that the person will not face a death penalty when they're returned to the United States. So there are very complex issues regarding extradition, and I've been trying to research this area of the law to become more fluent in the process as a result of this case.
The one thing that after I thought about it, I'm sure about, the United States would have the ability to prosecute them. After I thought about it, we prosecuted people in foreign country that committed terrorist act in the United States tangentially. We prosecute people, the Mexican drug cartel, who did not come to the United States, but shipped drugs into the United States. So I was just thinking about that. I don't know the federal statute, but more I think about it, I'm pretty sure that the United States government would be able to prosecute them under federal law for committing a crime against an American citizen by an American citizen in Mexico. Be interesting to see what happens, though.
What the United States does, from my familiarity with it, is that they go in and they kidnap the suspect and bring them back to the U.S. without going through the court system. That's what happened in the case you're talking about, where the young man killed the officer in Joliet, Illinois, Nate. They didn't extradite him. The feds went in and got with the federales in Mexico, and they just brought him back across the border against his will and avoided the extradition treaty, wherein Mexico does not extradite people back to the United States who are facing the death penalty. So oftentimes they ignore the treaties and take the law into their own hands and do what they want to do.
Well, thank you, Attorney Grimes. Thank you, Attorney Banks. And thank you for callers for calling in today. We're going to continue part of this discussion next week, because this case bears follow-up. And hopefully all the folks down in Georgia get out there and vote on Tuesday who have not already voted. We need at least about another 1.2 million of you folks in Georgia to vote for Raphael Warnock. And thank you and goodbye, everybody, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.